Under the deck, the traffic had been silent for weeks. The bridge closed, the river loud beneath it, the girders holding nothing but cold. He'd slept up in the steel for 8 nights, and the barricades kept everyone else out. He kills the light and lies still, and the truth assembles itself from the sounds. The catwalk beneath him is already shivering. It is an inspection walkway, a narrow grated steel path slung under the roadway, hung between the 2 great box girders that carry the bridge, close enough to the underside of the deck that he can touch the concrete above him without sitting up. For 8 nights, it has been the steadiest thing in his life. Now it trembles, a fine, continuous vibration coming down through the rigging. Because 40 feet away, a crane's hook is descending toward the far end of it, and the crew that arrived in the dark has come to take the catwalk down. He understands the whole of it now, lying in the trembling dark. The barricades are coming off. The bridge has been closed for weeks for a rehabilitation. New deck, new joints, the steel scraped and painted, and that work is finished. And the last thing a crew does before a rebuilt bridge reopens is strip away everything temporary that helped them build it. The false work, the rigging, the slung inspection walkways like the one he is lying on. They are pulling the catwalks first, and the catwalk they will pull first of all, the one already shivering, as the hook drops toward its far anchor, is the one he has made his home. Tomorrow has come. Tomorrow is reopening day. And he is lying on a thing that is about to be lifted out from under him and carried away into the light, and he has perhaps a minute to stop being where he is before the hook makes the decision for him. He moves before the hook lands, because the one advantage he has is that no one knows to look for a person up here. That is the whole of his edge, the same edge it has always been. He is not a possibility in anyone's mind. A crew comes to strip a bridge, expecting steel and rigging, not a boy with a book. As long as he stays a thing no one is looking for, the dark is on his side. The moment anyone thinks to look, it isn't. He gathers his life in the dark by feel, the bedroll, the flashlight dark in his fist, the paperback swollen fat with river damp that he will not leave behind. And he goes along the catwalk, away from the descending hook, quick and low, toward the near box girder. He has spent 8 nights learning this understructure, the way you learn a dark house you're not supposed to be in. And he knows what the girder offers. A box girder is exactly what it sounds like, a great hollow beam of steel, rectangular in section, tall enough inside to stand in, running the length of the span to carry the deck's weight down to the piers. And every so often along its length, there is an access hatch, a bolted oval manhole in the steel web, cut so that inspectors can climb inside and check the box from within. He found one on his second night, out of curiosity, and worked the dogs loose, and looked into the black echoing interior, and closed it again, and thought nothing more of it. He thinks about it now. It is the one place on the whole understructure a person could be that a crew stripping the outside would have no reason to open. He reaches the hatch as, behind him, the crane takes the strain, and the far end of his catwalk lifts off its hangers with a groan of freeing steel. He works the dogs, the pivoting steel latches that hold the manhole cover, his cold fingers fumbling them in the dark, 1, 2, the third stiff and stubborn. And behind him the catwalk is coming up, section by section, the crew's shouts carrying under the deck, a work light swinging on somewhere at the far pier and throwing the girders into sudden hard shadow. If they rig a light down here before he is inside the box, he is a figure on an open understructure with nowhere to be. The third dog gives. He swings the cover open on its oval and folds himself through, shoulders turned, the swollen book shoved down his shirt, the bedroll abandoned because there is no time for it now. And he pulls the cover to behind him, not latched, just resting in its frame so he can move it again, and then he is inside the beam that holds up the bridge. The dark is so complete it has texture, a black that presses on the open eyes. The air is colder here, and smells of old paint and rust and the mineral breath of steel, and every sound outside comes to him magnified and hollow, ringing down the length of the box like noise down a pipe. He crouches on the bottom flange of the girder, with his heart going, and listens to the crew he cannot see take his home, apart on the other side of a half-inch of plate. The catwalk he slept on for 8 nights, rising into the light, out from under him, gone. He had found the bridge 8 nights ago because of a map that was not his. He lets himself have it now, crouched in the dark of the girder, with nothing to do but wait and listen, because the memory is quieter than the sounds outside, and he needs something quiet to hold. He had been down along the river at dusk, walking the closed approach where the barricades and the closioned bridge rehabilitation signs stood, looking for nothing in particular when he had seen it, a piece of paper wedged into the chain link where the fence met the abutment, folded small, gone soft with weather. He had worked it free and opened it, and it had been a map, hand-drawn, in pencil, on the back of a torn work order. A careful little diagram of the bridge's underside. It showed the loose panel in the hoarding where a person could slip past the barricade. It showed the ladder up onto the understructure. It showed, marked with a small, neat X, the inspection catwalk, and beside the X, in a cramped hand, 2 words, dry, warm. He had stood at the fence a long time with someone else's map in his hand. He did not know who had drawn it. He still doesn't. But whoever it was had known this bridge from underneath, had lived up in its steel the way he was about to, and had left the map wedged in the fence, like a note passed forward to whoever came next and needed it. Dry, warm, here's how. It was, he had thought, standing there, a strange and almost unbearable kindness. To have suffered a thing, and gotten out of it, and then to have gone to the trouble of leaving a chart of the suffering for a stranger you would never meet, so that the next person's version would be a little less cold. He had followed it, panel and ladder and catwalk, straight to the X, and found it exactly as promised, and he had slept his first untroubled sleep in a month 40 feet above a river, under a road that carried no one, on a stranger's directions. The map is in his pocket now, folded soft, the most valuable thing he owns, because it is the only thing anyone ever left him on purpose. The school had left him nothing on purpose. That was the difference he could not stop turning over. He had been raised, if you could call it that, in a boarding school, one of the grim old charitable kind, for boys with no one, where you were fed and schooled and kept and never once wanted. He remembers it as a set of sounds more than anything. The bell that ran the whole day, that told you when to rise and eat and pray and sleep, so that for 8 years he never once decided the shape of an hour for himself. The dormitory at night, 40 boys breathing, the particular loneliness of being surrounded and unknown, the squeak of the headmaster's shoes on the polished corridor, a sound the whole school listened for and dreaded. He had learned there the thing the school existed to teach without ever putting it in a lesson, that he was a temporary occupant of every space he stood in, that nothing was his, that the institution was only holding him until the day it could hand him back to a world that had no place set for him either. and on his 18th birthday in June. They had done the thing they always did, the thing the whole institution was quietly organized around. They had given him a handshake and a diploma and a bus ticket and walked him to a gate and closed it, aged out, processed through. No one had been unkind about it. That was almost the worst of it. The sheer administrative gentleness of being finished with, the way you are finished with a form. The paperback swollen in his pocket was the one book he had taken from the school library and never returned, the one story that had felt, in 8 years of being kept and not wanted, like it was actually written to him. A story about someone with no place who made one anyway, and he had carried it out through the gate because it was the only thing in the whole place that had ever felt like his, and because stealing it was the only goodbye he could think to leave. The 8 nights under the deck had been, in their strange way, the best of his life since the gate closed. There is a particular piece to a closed bridge that he had not expected and came to love. A working bridge is all noise, tires, horns, the endless grinding passage of the world. But a bridge closed for rehabilitation is a held breath, a great structure with its purpose suspended, and up in its silenced steel he had felt, for the first time in a year, unreachable in a way that was restful instead of lonely. At night, the river did all the talking. 40 feet below his catwalk, it moved against the piers in a continuous, low rushing that never changed and never stopped, and he learned to sleep inside that sound the way you sleep inside rain, so that the river became a kind of company, a thing that was always there and never asked him anything. The steel around him breathed with the temperature. It ticked and settled as the night cooled, contracting, a slow, irregular music of metal giving up the day's heat, and warmed and ticked again toward dawn. He came to know the understructure by touch in the dark, the grated catwalk, the cold flange of the near girder, the rivets standing proud under his palm like braille, and to move along it without a light, which mattered because a light under a closed bridge at night is the one thing that could be seen from the bank. The cold he minded. It came up off the river and all settled in the steel and the steel gave it straight to him, and he slept in everything he owned and woke stiff. But cold he knew. Cold was the cheapest price he had ever paid for a roof, and this roof was a whole bridge, and no one on earth knew he was under it. And for 8 nights that had been enough, more than enough, a kind of wealth. He had read the swollen paperback by flashlight with the beam hooded in his coat, a chapter a night, rationing it because it was the only book he had, and the story in it was the closest thing to a home he carried. He had thought, drifting off above the river on the last of those nights, that he could live like this a long time, that the world had closed a gate on him, and he had found, underneath the world, a place the gate did not reach. He had not known that tomorrow was reopening day. The map had said dry, warm. It had not said for how long. The first trucks come at mid-morning, and they change the danger entirely. He hears the crew finish with the catwalks, the crane working down the span, lifting the slung walkways off one by one, the shouts and the clang of freeing steel receding toward the far pier. And he thinks, for one foolish hour, that the worst is past, that he need only wait in the girder until they finish and go, and then slip out in the evening onto a reopened bridge and be gone. He is wrong, because a rebuilt bridge does not simply reopen. Before the public is allowed onto a rehabilitated deck, the bridge must be proven, load tested, and he learns this the way he learns everything, through the steel, when the sound above him changes from the light business of men and hand tools to something enormous and slow. Engines. Heavy ones, diesel, laboring under weight, coming out onto the deck above him in a line. He presses his hand flat to the steel web of the girder and feels them arrive, and he understands, with a slow, cold dread, what a load test is. To prove a deck can carry traffic, they drive trucks onto it. Trucks loaded to a known, deliberate weight. Dump trucks heaped with gravel or tanks brimful of water, each one weighing as much as the heaviest load the bridge will ever legally bear. And they place them at the calculated worst points, and they measure how far the bridge bends. That is the whole test. They load it until it flexes, and they read the flex, and if the flex is right, the bridge is safe. And he is inside the bridge, in the box girder that carries the load, 40 feet up, while they drive the heaviest weights the structure will ever feel out onto the deck directly over his head. The girder begins to take the load, and he feels it in his body. Steel is not silent under weight. That is the first thing the test teaches him. He had thought of the great box girder as solid, dead, a fact. It is not. As the first loaded truck creeps out to its marked position on the deck above, the whole beam around him comes alive. It groans, a deep structural sound felt more than heard, a note that starts somewhere below hearing and rises into the chest. The sound of 100 tons of steel accepting a burden and passing it hand to hand down toward the pier. The bottom flange he is crouched on, the base of the box, goes into tension and sings with it. A faint, high strain he can feel through his boots and the heels of his hands, the metal actually lengthening by fractions under the pull. Rivets and bolted splices tick and settle all around him in the dark, a scattering of small, hard reports as the whole assembly takes up its slack and locks. Somewhere in the black above him a diaphragm, one of the steel walls set crossways inside the box to hold its shape under load, flexes and pops back, a sound like a struck drum rolling away, down the hollow length of the beam and returning, changed, off the far pier. He crouches on the singing floor of the beam and makes himself small and breathes shallow, and the dark presses on his open eyes, and the cold of the steel comes up through him, and the river runs on somewhere far below, indifferent. Above him another engine labors out onto the deck, and another, and the groan of the girder deepens and steadies with each one until it is a continuous low chord, the sound of the bridge, under the heaviest load it will ever be asked to bear. A sound almost no living person has ever heard from the inside, because almost no living person has ever been fool enough or lost enough to be inside a bridge while it was proven. He listens to the structure hold and holds himself as still as the structure and waits. He does the arithmetic of it and does not like the answer. He is safe from being crushed. The girder is built to carry many times this. The whole point of the test is that it will hold, but safe is not the same as unnoticed, and the test is not the danger he thought it was. The danger is subtler, and it is this: the deck above him is deflecting, bending. Under the full line of trucks, the whole span sags measurably, a few inches at midspan and a few inches of a bridge bending is an enormous slow movement of everything attached to it. And he is attached to it, inside it. And the deflection is closing the small spaces. He feels it happen in increments, and each increment is worse for being so slow. The bottom flange he crouches on tilts, very slightly, as the span curves into its load. The whole beam is bowing, and the floor of it with it, so that the level dark he crawled into is no longer level. The cells of the box change shape around him by fractions. Where the manhole was a clean oval it goes, imperceptibly, to something that is not quite an oval anymore, the top corner drawing tighter as the web above racks under the sag. He hears the steel accommodate the geometry in small, sharp reports, a rivet head singing, a splice plate slipping the width of a hair against its neighbor and locking. And he understands, crouched in the belly of the bending bridge, that a load test is designed to hold the load steady. The trucks will creep to their calculated worst points, and then stop and sit, dead weight, for as long as the engineers need to read their instruments, which could be minutes, which could be longer. The bridge will hold its full bend for the length of the reading, and for the length of the reading, he will be sealed inside a flecked steel box with the one door pressed out of true. He goes to the hatch to check it, and it is already tight. Here is the cold heart of the test, the thing no one on the deck above will ever know happened. The manhole he came in through, the oval cut in the web of the girder, has racked out of true under the deflection. The cover, which swung free an hour ago, now binds in its frame, the whole beam subtly parallelogrammed by the sag of the loaded span, and when he pushes it, the steel does not give. He is not crushed. He is not in danger of being crushed. He is simply, quietly, shut in, locked inside a box girder by the exact bending the bridge is supposed to do, and the box will not unbend and let him out until the trucks come off the deck and the span rises back to level. He cannot leave during the test. He can only wait inside the loaded beam, in the total dark, feeling it hold its enormous bend, and count on the engineers above to finish their reading and release the load before the air in a sealed steel box, and the pressure in his own chest do something he can't count his way out of. He puts his back against the cold curved web of the girder and makes himself breathe slow. He takes out the paperback he could not leave behind, though he cannot see it, and holds it, the soft swollen weight of the one thing that was ever his. And he waits inside the bridge while strangers overhead prove it strong by bending it around him. And then, while he waits, someone comes down into the understructure. He hears it over the groan of the loaded girder. Boots on the pier stair, then on the understructure itself. Unhurried, deliberate, a single person walking the length of the span beneath the deck while the trucks hold their load above. An inspector, he realizes, and his blood goes to ice. Of course they inspect during the test. That is half the point. While the trucks bend the span, an engineer walks the steel underneath with a flashlight and a clipboard, checking the girders and the bearings and the splices for any sign of distress under the proof load, looking, in other words, directly at the outside of the box girder. He is sealed inside. He hears the boots stop near his cell. He hears the small businesslike sounds of a person examining steel, a light playing across the web, a gloved hand testing a splice, the scratch of a pencil. He sits frozen on the tilted flange in the total dark, the racked manhole a foot from the inspector's head, and he does not breathe, and he thinks. If that cover is noticed, sitting proud of its frame, if a hand tries it, if a light catches the worked dogs, it is over, all of it, the 8 nights and the map and the quiet wealth. Over in the beam of a stranger's flashlight, the boots stay a long time. The pencil scratches. The light moves across the steel an inch from his hidden face. And then, he will never know why, whether the inspector saw nothing or saw something and chose to see nothing. The boots move on, down the span toward the far pier, and the small sounds recede, and he is left shaking on the flange in a dark that suddenly feels less like a shelter and more like a held breath about to be let go. He had thought the sealed hatch was the danger, Now he understands there is a person walking his ceiling with a light and a whole crew above, and that the load test has not one clock but two. The deflection that seals him in, and the inspection that could find him at any second he remains. He puts the book against his chest and counts his own heartbeats until the shaking stops. The voice comes through the steel a long time later, when the trucks have sat their measured while, and he has begun, despite himself, to breathe too fast in the dark. It is not shouted. It comes through the web of the girder from just outside, low, meant only for the steel and whoever might be behind it. A person crouched at the racked manhole on the outside, tapping it once with a knuckle and saying, quietly, that they know. That they've known since the second morning, when they found the catwalk nest gone and the hatch dogs worked loose by hands that weren't on the crew list. That they drew a map once and wedged it in a fence for whoever came next, years ago when this bridge last closed and they were the ones sleeping in its steel. And that when they came back onto the crew this season and saw the panel in the hoarding pushed aside just so they'd known, someone was reading their old map and had said nothing to the foreman, and had timed their own work all morning to keep the crew's eyes off the near girder. He sits in the dark on the other side of the steel and does not answer, and the voice does not need him to. It talks the way a person talks who remembers what it was to have no one to talk to, evenly, without pushing, filling the dark with something that is almost company. It tells him it was the inspector just now, that they'd walked the understructure during the load, hold precisely so no one else would, and had stood a good while at his cell, with a light and a pencil, making a show of checking a splice so that any other set of boots that came down would find the near girder already inspected and move on. It tells him the load test will release in 20 minutes. The engineers have their numbers. The trucks are about to come off. The span will rise back to level, and the beam will square itself, and the racked hatch will swing free again, and it tells him where to go when it does, not out the way he came, which the reopening will fill with people, but along the box girder's interior to the far pier, cell by cell through the manholes in the diaphragms, to an access door that lets out onto the pier stair below the parapet, where a person can walk down to the riverbank and away and never cross the deck at all. It tells him this the way the map told him: dry, warm, here's how. The directions of someone who has been exactly where he is and got out, passed forward through half an inch of steel. Then the voice says one more thing, the only personal thing, before it goes, that the book was a good one, that they'd read it too, up in the same steel, years ago, off the same closed bridge. The same swollen library copy, most likely, left behind on the catwalk by one squatter for the next, the way the map was left in the fence, and that the reason the map said dry, warm, and not go home was that some of us don't have the second one, and the first one has to do, and there is no shame in it, and a person can build a whole life out of dry and warm if they stop waiting for the other word to come. The knuckle taps the steel once more in farewell, and the presence outside the girder is gone. The load releases 20 minutes later, exactly as the voice said. He feels it happen. The trucks coming off the deck one by one, the girder's deep groan, easing note by note as the weight lifts, the great bent span rising slowly back toward level, the cells of the box squaring themselves around him, the tension going out of the bottom flange until it is just cold steel again, and not a singing thing. He goes to the manhole and pushes, and this time it swings free on its trued frame, the oval opening onto the dim understructure, and the enormous relief of a space larger than a coffin. He does not go out into it yet. He waits and listens and follows the voice's directions instead of his own instinct, along the inside of the girder, cell by cell through the manholes in the diaphragms, toward the far pier, away from the reopening. He never sees the mapmaker's face. By the time he reaches the far access door and lets himself out onto the pier stair, the crew is gathered at the near abutment for the reopening, small figures in vests around a ribbon, and any one of them could be the person who tapped the steel, and none of them looks his way. And that, he understands, is the last kindness, to be let leave unseen the way he needed. He goes down the pier stair to the riverbank in the bright ordinary noon, the paperback in one pocket and the soft folded map in the other, and he stands at the bottom for a moment, among the weeds and the river stink and the light, a person who has come out from under a bridge into a day. He does not leave right away. He climbs the bank a little to where he can see the deck, and he waits because there is one thing left he wants to witness. At noon, they cut the ribbon, and the barricades come off the approach, and the first public traffic in weeks rolls out onto the rebuilt bridge. Ordinary cars, a delivery van, a school bus, people going about a Tuesday with no idea that the road under their tires was bent double around a boy that same morning and proven strong. He watches the first cars cross the roof he lived under for 8 nights. He watches the deck take their weight. A weight that is nothing now, a scatter of little sedans, where this morning there were tanks of water heavy as houses, and not so much as quiver, the great girders underneath, swallowing the load of a whole town's traffic without a groan, and he alone in the crowd knows what those girders sound like when they are truly asked, and he alone knows a person can be inside them when they answer. He feels the thing the voice must have felt years ago, watching the same sight off the same bridge. A private, enormous, unshareable satisfaction, the defiant joy of the one person in the whole reopening day crowd, who knows the bridge from the inside, who slept in its dark and rode its bending and walked out unseen, and owes the celebration nothing, and takes from it a secret that is entirely his. The mayor or whoever it is says words he cannot hear over the river. A small cheer goes up. Cameras. He stands in the weeds at the bottom of the bank, unwashed, unnoticed, uninvited, and claps once, quietly for himself. He takes the folded map out of his pocket and looks at it one more time. The careful pencil lines, the small neat X, the 2 words, dry, warm. Then he does the thing he has been dodging to do since a voice tapped the steel. He walks back to the closed approach, to the chain link where the fence meets the abutment, and he wedges the map into the same gap he first found it in, folded small, waiting for whoever comes next when this bridge or some bridge closes again and someone with nowhere to be needs to know that the steel is dry and the steel is warm, and here is how. Then he goes down the river road into the afternoon. Behind him, the first traffic hums across the reopened span. Steady now, a road doing the ordinary work of a road, carrying people who will never once wonder what is underneath them. And the map waits in the fence where he left it, folded small, patient, a note passed forward down a line of the unwanted, from a stranger to the mapmaker to him, and now on to whoever is next. He walks, and for a while he lets himself simply feel the sun, which he has not felt properly in 8 days of living under a road. And somewhere out ahead of him, he lets himself think it, for the first time since a gate closed in June, there is a person who read the same book up in the same dark, and got out and came back and joined the crew, and kept an eye on the near girder all mourning for a stranger. That person is real. That person exists, walks around in the world, has a name and a vest and a place on a crew, which means the world has at least one of those people in it. One person who was finished with the way he was finished with, and did not let it finish him, and turned around to leave the door propped for the next one. And if the world has one, he thinks, walking, it might have more. It might even, someday, have a place set for a boy who has only ever been a temporary occupant of every space he stood in. He does not know where the mapmaker ended up, but he finds, going down the river road with the book in his pocket, that for the first time he would like to. That the next map he finds wedged in a fence might be worth following, not just to a dry, warm place, but all the way to wherever the person who left it finally decided to stay.